The first Vanguard video did so much better than I ever would have expected it to. I was honestly expecting it to be one of my least viewed videos, but it turns out that people really do want to listen to me talk about this franchise. But I was also left at a crossroads. I do like making Vanguard videos, but I don't want them to be the only ones that ever get views, so I intentionally left a really big gap of time between the first Vanguard video and this one. Thanks for putting up with me, and let's finally look at CardFight Vanguard G. Well, before we get to that, I had neglected to talk about the movie Neon Messiah last time. Since it has connections with both the first and second generation of Vanguard, I didn't quite know where to put it, so I'll awkwardly fit it in here. Unlike most anime tie-in films, Neon Messiah is actually important to the overall story, so is a must-watch, which is why it's ironic that it's so difficult to watch. I'm not saying the film is bad, but I'm saying it's not available in English. That's right, no English dub and no official English subtitles. Even if you were to take one of the less official methods, there don't exist any high quality fan subs at this moment in time either. Because of the lack of any good English translation, I have to admit that I struggled through this film. This is something that Bushiroad really need to fix as soon as they can. The film is set during another tournament, but this time it's more of a set piece and doesn't get much focus. It helps get the plot into motion, but not much else. And this plot is quite interesting since it focuses on a new character called Koji Ibuki, who is the original owner of Aichi's Blaster Blade. Koji serves as the main reason this film is connected to G, since whilst this is his first appearance, he appears early on in G as well. The presentation is probably the best thing about this film. Because of the fact it is a film, it gets a very big boost in production value, meaning that the animation looks a lot nicer than the series. Ultra Rare even get a new insert song here, which is honestly the highlight of the film for me. The start of G is very similar to the way the original Vanguard began, where it shows how the protagonist gets into the card game. Chrono Shindo wishes for more in life and has recently been lacking any kind of motivation or passion. One day he finds a Gear Chronicle CardFight Vanguard deck in his locker. He has no clue what Vanguard even is or how the deck got there, but it captures his interest, so he goes to a nearby card shop after school. He gets to Card Capital 2 and meets one of the shop assistants, Kamui Katsuragi. Kamui is interested in the deck, so decides to convince Chrono to give the game a shot instead of getting rid of it. That's when we get the usual tutorial card fight and we see Chrono get one over. One thing the first generation of the anime did a lot was jump up in production value, and this is noticeable in this first episode too. This first card fight is absolute eye candy as well as doing a great job of showing us G's strengths and weaknesses. First of all, G gets a very good balance between old and new. It really feels like it's set in the same town a few years later, and the way it's progressed feels like it naturally picks up where Legion Mate had left off. Card Capital is now a franchise that has 2 stores, with this second one being much bigger and bringing in more customers. Technology is advanced, and instead of using playmats, card fights are now held upon touchscreens. Kamui has gotten older and works at Card Capital, with him serving as the mentor character that bridges the gap between generations. Not to mention that him being one of the younger characters in the previous series, but one of the oldest now, is a fun status quo mix-up. However, we're already introduced to G's first weakness, one that makes itself more apparent as time goes on. The card fight doesn't get much focus. I thought it was fine here since this episode was about introducing Chrono and giving us the usual tutorial, but it is a problem that becomes more apparent, especially considering that the main driving force of these first few episodes is Chrono getting into the game. Something that would have invested me in his journey more is if the card game side of it had better execution rather than them just breezing through each card fight as fast as possible. Because this is the beginning of a generation, it's also when we get introduced to a new cast of characters, but it's unfortunate that the card fights that we're introduced to them with are weak and left no impression on me. It's frustrating when they spend a decent amount of time building up the first fight between Chrono and Jamie, only for the fight to end up unsatisfying. Believe it or not, there really is an art to making card games fun to watch, but G's fast pace means we just breeze through them for no real reason. Luckily, after the first few episodes, they start to slowly improve. Another thing the first episode does well is set up a mystery. How and why did the Gear Chronicle deck appear in Chrono's locker? Setting up a mystery like this is a great hook to make me want to keep watching so I can learn the answer. And the solution to said mystery is pretty decent too. It's not the cleverest twist in the world or anything, but they do give you enough clues to guess correctly beforehand, and my guess was completely wrong. For the most part, this first arc is about Chrono getting into the game and meeting new people. This side of things is admittedly similar to how the first Vanguard began, and it's really the change of cast that makes this worth watching, as well as the world building. G focuses on the world building a surprising amount. The main thing it adds in this regard are the branches, places where the card fighters can learn to get better and maybe even become pros, with the main branch being the Dragon Empire branch. I really like that Chrono is so different to Aichi. I'm aware that sounds weird since Aichi is actually my favourite anime character, but why even have a new protagonist if they're going to be exactly like the last one? Aichi was a shy character that wanted to befriend everyone, whereas Chrono is hot-headed and direct, which makes for a nice change of pace. Just like before, Chrono needs to form a team in order to enter tournaments, and luckily those tournaments don't take up much of the runtime of this arc. The other two members of Chrono's team are Shion Kiba and Anjo Tokuha. I'll get back to Shion a little later since he gets more focused in Gears Crisis, but Tokuha gets a lot of hers now. Tokuha is the younger sister of a pro player Mamoru. Her motivation and development mostly revolves around her wanting to stand on her own and not always having to live in her older brother's shadow. A lot of her opponents throughout the series tend to be people that compare her to Mamoru, so the strong motivation made me root for her even more than Chrono or any of the others. The side characters like Kumi and Trinity Dragon are very likeable but never seem to get enough meaningful screen time. The part where this arc really excels is early on when it builds a pleasant breezy tone and introduces the characters. However, later on it does try to have a storyline that doesn't quite work. The stuff with Chrono's backstory is pretty good, but it ends up just being foreshadowing for Stridegate. Other than that, the last few episodes were weak. A younger character named Tayo wants to improve and ends up being too hard on himself. He joins the United Sanctuary branch, who use sadistic training methods to get results. So Chrono's team attempt to convince Tayo that having fun is more important than skill, and that no card game is worth hurting yourself over. It's a decent enough idea for an arc, but the execution is very by the numbers, and it's just not very fun to watch. Something about the setting or tone is just unpleasant, but not in a way that added anything to this plot, which meant that it felt like it dragged on for longer than it actually did. Overall, this first arc is still good, but it doesn't quite reach the heights of better Vanguard arcs. It does a good enough job of introducing the characters, and was a fun watch for the most part. By this point, the card fights had already gotten much better. As usual, we start with a tutorial card fight where Chrono teaches a new character named Luna how to play. Luna is a member of the idol duo that replaces Ultra Rare, Rummy Labyrinth, and yes, both idol groups' names are card puns. I liked Ultra Rare and its characters a lot, so I wasn't really looking forward to seeing their replacements, but I ended up liking Rummy Labyrinth more than I was expecting to. Not only do I like their music more, but I like that they have a different dynamic. Now, I'm fully aware this next part is going to sound out of nowhere to people that haven't actually seen it happen, and trust me, I don't like delving into things that sound like bad Tumblr fan theories, but the dynamic between Arm and Luna is more of a romantic one. I will give the benefit of the doubt and say that isn't really outright said in the show itself yet, but believe me when I say it's definitely there. I was considering not even including this part at all since I know for a fact that no matter how I worded it, people would accuse me of inserting my own fan theory into this anime analysis video, but it's an important part of these two characters that they present themselves in that way because it's radically different to how Ultra Rare were sisters. The reason Luna even had this practice card fight was so she could impress Arm with how much she's improved and can finally hold her own against her. After this fight, a new tournament is announced, but this one has an interesting twist. The competitors have to fight against the most powerful card fighters from the past. Just so I don't get your hopes up, no, Aichi doesn't return for a card fight quite yet, but that does happen in a future arc. However, pretty much every other character you'd expect to return does. Let's finally get to Shion, because this is when they finally start doing something with his character. He's from a really wealthy family, and because of that he has to juggle card fighting with fencing, school, and his family duties. His family frown upon him wasting his time playing a card game, but he enjoys doing it so he ignores them anyway. The family hold a coming of age ceremony where they give Shion some power over the family's company, as well as officially announcing him the heir. A jealous relative hires a con man by the name of Ace to take that power away from him. Ace manages to steal an extremely valuable antique and Shion accepts Ace's challenge. If he wins, he gets the antique back. If he loses, Ace legally acquires his right to the family company, as well as his fortune and assets. Shion loses. His family are forced to move away, but Shion decides to stay behind and right his wrong. This is one of the best Vanguard episodes I've ever seen, because I went into it expecting it to be an unimportant episode where Shion wins the fight and we forget this ordeal happened in the first place. The sheer bait and switch flips this entire arc on its head, and the best part is that it comes out of nowhere. During the ending theme of this arc, it will show different sets of characters dancing along with the music. But in this episode, Shion just stood there looking depressed instead, which is the kind of detail I assume 90% of people completely missed. Another really good detail is that there aren't any voice actors accredited to Ace. Instead it just has some question marks, which was a really interesting way of raising intrigue. The rest of Shion's arc is really good too. His series of card fights against Kai were pretty much perfect despite me not expecting the two of them to go together well. Kai even gives Shion his old jacket from the Asia Circuit arc, which is another great way of passing the torch. The only real flaw I can find with this arc is that it's a tournament arc that slows down by the end. It stays really short at only 26 episodes, and it starts super strong, which makes this one of the best arcs in the franchise so far. A trend that I have noticed by this point is that I seem to enjoy the moments when Vanguard is slow paced and character focused, and with the exception of Link Joker, I'm pretty indifferent to or even dislike the parts where the characters have to defeat a villain or supernatural elements come into play. I knew that Stride Gate was going to be one of those villain focused arcs since it had so much foreshadowing building up to it, but that's why I'm surprised to say that other than Link Joker, this is my favourite CardFight Vanguard story arc so far. It's only 24 episodes, making it the shortest arc so far. This means it doesn't waste my time and get straight into it. The villain Ryuzu has believable motivations too. He wants to stop physical violence from ever happening again and plans to replace conflict with card games instead. This is not an easy goal to implement at all, and his plan to get there causes lots of casualties. Chrono and the others don't want any of those casualties to happen, and want Vanguard to keep being a game about fun rather than a method to end wars, so we're tasked to stop him. And that's everything this arc focuses on. Everything that happens in this arc in some way or form contributes to this, and we even get some flashbacks to properly flesh out the character motivations and viewpoints further. This is also when we see the conclusion to Shion's arc, which stays interesting to the end. I find it pretty difficult to talk about anime or arcs that are straight up good and solidly put together, so I'll use this time to talk about the stuff I haven't mentioned yet. The animation throughout all of G stays very consistent for an anime this long, and by this point it looks so much better than the very first Vanguard arc did. One thing the animation excels at here is the lighting. We constantly get parts that are really nicely lit, whether that's in a brightly lit room or during sunset. The soundtrack is great too. It goes in a different direction that works, with a few of the songs being really catchy and memorable. The opening and ending themes are fantastic, with Stride Gate's opening being one of my favourite of all time. The English dub is on par with my expectations, with the highlight performance being Tokuha. Her voice fits really well.
It's okay, Kumi. You don't have to hand over your food to this bully.
And they continue the trend of hiring lesser known actors for new roles. And of course, every member of the returning cast has the same voice as last time too. So, that's every story arc of Vanguard G that has finished airing so far. I am indeed currently watching next, and will be doing a part 2 to this video once enough episodes have aired to warrant it. That was an anticlimactic end.